Hello Minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. And what we're going to do today is a floral. This is a picture that I took of a camellia at one of the plantations down in the Charleston area. And I'm doing this drawing here. I'm just going to basically ink it and then probably put a little color in it, although it'll be very, very limited color. I want a lot of the ink work to show, and I want to leave a lot of area uncolored, so I'll pick a portion of it. But as I start to ink this in, I want to talk a bit, as you watch me go through this, about how to determine your inking process. And I know if watercolor is unforgiving, ink is doubly so. So you kind of want to have a plan when you go into inking. And I guess the best way to approach it is to start out with an outline. And with inking, in my opinion, the style that I use, you need a really good drawing. So don't skimp on the drawing. Get a good, accurate drawing. Spend some time refining it. You can do it on separate paper and transfer it if you want to, if you're afraid of a lot of erasures. But start out with a really good drawing. And probably the next step is just outlining. And that's what I'm doing here. It's important to know when you outline something, you want that line to have some life, some interest to it. Whatever that means for you and your style. I mean, you can do a very clean mono weight line if you want. In a naturalistic or realistic subject such as this, I like it to have a little more character than just a clean mono weight line. So I will vary the weight. You'll see on the outer edge of some of these leaves, and I'm thinking that my light source comes from the upper left. I leave the line even broken a little bit. I can always go back and darken it, and I'm leaving the line a little heavier in places. And that just helps sell the effect of light hitting one side. But whatever hatching and shading you're going to do is going to be done usually within an outline. There may be cases where you just don't want to outline something at all, or you want to outline it very lightly. So go lightly until you determine that. But in this case, with these very discrete leaves and petals in the flower, pretty much everything's going to have an outline. Then within that outline, you can determine if there will be any dark little recesses. So a lot of times I'll go back on the shadow side, just add little heavy strokes in areas. Now I'm going to do this ink pretty much in detail to carry all the values, or most of the values. Any color I add is going to be very sparse. And again, I'm just hitting some of these on the shadow side of the leaf with a little extra weight. In some cases, a little bit of thickness to indicate shadow where there are overlaps. You may ask, how do you get life in your line? You know, that's something you need to practice, but let's use a leaf as an example. You know, if I'm drawing a leaf, I could just do a fairly simple shape like that. But the other thing I could do is, and I don't recommend this. This is something artists do sometimes to try to give a life to their line, and I don't think it's necessarily works. If you love that, okay, but what I think works is make curves, and again, this is style related, make your curves a little more rounded and then angular in places. Have smooth curves if you want. Draw on segments, do a little dot dash, that's one way. Another way is like overlap lines that don't quite meet, that's not the same as this scratchy approach. Just find ways to get some interesting life in your lines. Anyway, that's just touching on how to get life in your lines a little bit. It's something that you have to play with. It's very stylistic. It's very kind of intuitive. What it isn't, what a lifeless line is like, is this slow, kind of laborious, blah line. Again, I realize I'm speaking kind of in a stylistic way, and there is a place for that, all right, in a more graphic treatment. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying in realistic pen and ink drawing, sometimes it's better, it's more interesting to get some life in your line. Be it variations in weight, a little bit of angularity in places, something. Best way to do it is study masters at pen and ink, people who have done a really good job and who have a lot of expression and life and feeling to their work. All right, so back to this, and I pretty much have an outline all over now, and I'm just tweaking kind of let me get a little more shadow here on the side of these branches. And keep in mind that when the light, even though I think the light may be coming this way, leaves turn and they curl, and so something like this, for instance, may roll under. Good reference will help you. So I think there's going to be shadow on this part of the leaf. I'm just going to indicate where there's some depth, some of these overlaps here. And see, this is already adding a little more interest to the line, to the shape. You can do a lot just with a line. You know, you get your overlaps looking right. Some of these little places where the petals crisscross in the back layers may be almost black down in the recesses. Okay, that's looking fairly good, like I'm wanting. Let's talk about now how we would hatch this. And as I mentioned, I'm going to do all the shading with ink. The color is going to do very little of the work. How do I ink that? How do I hatch that? How do you determine what to do? Well, let's look at some ways in which you can determine that. Well, first of all, when you start to shade your drawing or your ink, you want to determine what direction you're going and what kind of strokes you're going to use. Those are the two main things. Now, if there is texture, like let's say a stem, it might have a little bit of bark texture. You can use texture as part of your shading. It sort of imitates the bark or whatever. The closer you space it and the darker and bolder you make those strokes, the more it appears to be in shadow. And then on the light side, you know, you have little to none. However, in most of the case here, the leaves and the petals are all smooth, so you're going to have to use some sort of smooth value creating mechanism, and that's usually hatching. And when you do hatching, you need to determine what direction you're going to hatch. Now, the mistake I see made the most is hatching to make something look flat. It doesn't accentuate form, it shows no dimension. So usually what you want to do is find a way to accentuate this form. Now, two ways to do that. You could follow the way the leaf bends, or you could follow the way the leaf curls out. That's how I prefer to do a leaf. Because if you look at a leaf as a cross section, usually it's like this. There are some leaves that are more flat, so depending on the light, it's going to hit one part of it, like maybe this part, and then the part coming into the center stem and then the part falling away are going to be shaded. So what I usually like to do, and you can change direction, is I like to follow that form because that gives me or communicates to me the most direction or dimension. And again, I am making these very bold and very coarse just for demonstration's sake. So this is the highlight, then it falls away, and we're going to have maybe this kind of a shading. And then this tip curls down, so that's going to get less light. So you can actually fan your shading to conform to that. So those are the kind of considerations you need to have when you're determining which direction you're going to hatch or shade. Now, I'm going to do much finer lines and probably closer together. As I said, you could go and follow the leaf this way. I think that's a little more difficult, and I wouldn't hesitate to do some of it that way and some of it this way, but I don't think you get any of that interesting dimension from side to side. But because it's a smooth surface, you want to get a fairly even shading going. And then you're going to have to determine what you're going to do out here if you follow the same shading pattern. It's something to experiment with and see what you like. Personally, I think this way is going to work the best. So this is kind of the shading pattern I'm going to go for. Now, another thing you can do is once you get a basic outline that you're going to ink done, make a copy. And this could be something you practice on. If you're not confident in your inking, you want to try different things, make 4 or 5 copies like this and then give it a try. And you can even use pencil, you know, so you could erase and try different ways. This is really what I'm thinking of doing right here with the petals. I like that, and as I mentioned, I like that on the leaves because, so anyway, these copies are great ways to sort of dress rehearse your strokes. And it really is something you want to think about and strategize before you go putting hatching strokes everywhere, because things can go awry in a big hurry. So I hope those tips help you. Let's get into inking this bad boy. Alright, we're going to call that one done. And I did a couple things that aren't on video. I added just a very slight hint of color in the background, just a wet and wet. Just something cool that receded and added a little more interest. But as you can see, I kept the watercolor very, very simple. I didn't get real involved in painting at all, and I made sure that none of the washes were very dark, because I really wanted all the ink work to shine through. This is something I thought about doing in the landscape video and kind of wished I had, but here you can see it done to its full effect. When you do a lot of line work like this, if you're going to color it, this is just a really, really interesting way to go. It takes on sort of a nice vintage feel, and I really like that. Well, thank you everybody. Appreciate you watching and tuning in. I hope that was useful and helpful and enjoyable for you. Thank you so much, patrons. Thank you for sponsoring this channel, and we will see everyone in the next video. Bye-bye.